My name's Jeff. Welcome to Versus Live.
Why write poetry?
Poem is done. Like, what was the point here? I also don't know where this poem is going.
Poetry's very love-hate.
The worst possible thing is them just saying no.
Hello, everyone. Morning, even
Hey.
afternoon, whatever time it is when you're watching this. I'm Jeff,
I'm Matthias.
and this is again the Versus Live, the
Yeah.
podcast in Columbus, Ohio, where we take a look at all things poetry related. Thanks to Throwaway Cafe, our wonderful hosts. But Matthias, I had a actually, before I even get into a question I have for you, just some upcoming events. First of all, I know Ajane is doing something soon.
Yeah. So my wife Ajane, she actually has a show, 2 shows, as a matter of fact. One in Dayton, Ohio this Friday, March 3rd, and one in Columbus, Ohio, this Saturday, March 4th. And they are both through Broken English 101. And it's a group of poets that really came together with a mission, and they are really revitalizing and really kind of bringing our culture to the forefront. And I was super excited and privileged to be able to work with them in January for a show. And now yet again, my wife is going to be featuring with them this Friday and Saturday. So the Friday show is in Dayton. So if you're in the Dayton area, actually, if you go to Broken English 101, if you go to Broken English 101 on Instagram, you can actually click the link that's in my bio. Then you can actually secure a ticket, or if you just go to or if you just go to their Instagram, we actually just put up a contest, I guess you would say, maybe. But if anybody knows my wife Ajane, she is incredibly passionate about Black women, and she's incredibly passionate about creating spaces for Black women. And I mean, it's not right now. I guess like today is like the last day of Black History Month, and then tomorrow is going to start Women's History Month. And so she really wanted to do something that really kind of like showcase that. So she actually bought a ticket for each show, and specially reserved it for any Black woman who wanted to come to the show that perhaps wasn't able to if they didn't have the funds or the availability. So all you have to do to claim the ticket, I think she's going to be like choosing it, I think tomorrow. No, she's going to be choosing it on Thursday. All you have to do is just comment in their latest post who your favorite Black woman artist is and why, and let her know what city that you plan on going to, and then that way we can go ahead and make sure you get that ticket. But Broken English, they're establishing something really important and crucial. I think this is like they're going into this is like their second season, and so I'm really excited for what they have lined up for the rest of this season, but also I'm really excited for the culture and kind of what they're bringing to the culture, because I think it's really important. So if you're in the Dayton area on March 3rd, definitely consider getting a ticket. Go to the link in my bio. Go to the link. Moons at Dusk, she's the feature. There's also going to be 2 other Black women that are performing, Mariah and Morgan Page. I've seen them both. They're really incredible performers, and it's just going to be a world-class show. So if you're in the Dayton area, March 3rd, go ahead and secure yourself a ticket. And then if you're in the Columbus area, March 4th, go ahead and secure yourself a ticket and join in the dialogue in their latest post, and let us know who your favorite Black woman artist is.
Cool. Thank you for doing that.
Also on Sunday, I'm gonna be going to Costco.
Oh,
I don't know if that's as reputable as the rest of the stuff that I just mentioned, but I just wanted to let everybody know my plans. That's where I plan on going.
Whenever I think of Costco, I think they're the number 1 pizza chain in the U.S.
They absolutely are. Like that.
It's actually decent pizza. Like, it's not bad pizza.
It's not even just that it's not bad pizza. Because here's the thing, it's like $1.50 for like that huge slice, and then it's like $5 for that huge pizza. And I'm thinking to myself, like, this is stupid. These prices are incredible. And then like I eat it, I'm like you're thinking like maybe it's not even going to be that great, but like it's like
No,
really
it's
great
like
pizza
it's
for the
not bad.
price.
Yeah, I've had
So-
worse pizzas that are more expensive.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to let everybody know my plans. Friday, I'm at Broken English. Saturday, I'm at Broken English. Sunday, see you at Costco. They didn't pay me to say that either, so
Not yet, but Costco accepts sponsors. Yeah,
you'll know where to find me.
Also, just heads up, for those of you who are aware of in the past, pre end of the world days, I had a series called Fine Print, where basically we would read poems and analyze them.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to announce that we're partnering with Streetlight Guild
Streetlight.
for we're doing like a 3-month kind of series. So the second Sunday of the month, through March, April, and I think June, because we had to skip May, or at least change the location for May. But more details on that. The big one is March to get started. So second Sunday of March at 12. It's either 12 or 12:30. I do need to double check that. You can keep an eye on our page for the exact time. But you can stop by a Streetlight Guild and spend an hour and a half with us just kind of reading poems, analyzing poems, seeing what works, what are they doing, and things like that. So if you're trying to get some reading in,
dude, I'm really excited that you're getting back into that. I think that like that was especially when you were like in the process of like really being able to help people with their work or really help people get a different perspective on the work. It was like incredibly helpful. And so, yeah, I'm really excited for the work that you're going to be doing up there at Streetlight Guild. So if you're available, if you got poems, you should definitely take them up. Or not even if not got poems. If you have your mindset on writing poems and really creating, I think like this is a series that'll help you kind of wrap your head around like the concept of editing or the concept of like the directionality of work. And Jeff does a really good job at helping you figure that stuff out.
Thank you, sir.
And Jeff is also going to Costco the day after each of those shows just to stock up. So
I'm actually not. Costco's kind of hard to get to.
Dang it!
I don't have a car, man.
You got to keep up the illusion.
I'll be there in spirit. Nah, if I went there, I would go for pizza.
We would go for pizza.
I would do that.
That's amazing.
I think it's kind of to actually kind of connect what you said to what I wanted to discuss today. So you mentioned that, just in terms of things that were going on in the city poetry wise, and one of the reasons I started the series is because it wasn't something that exists in a whole lot of cities, let alone Columbus, Ohio. So that's kind of like one of the unique things is just like reading poems that one aren't your own poems, and then two, kind of digging into them. You know, outside of like a college course, you don't really get a whole lot of that. Where people just kind of doing their own notes and marginalia. But one thing Columbus, at least historically, like the last like 5-10 years, not even right now, not as much. One thing that Columbus did a lot of was hosting open mics and things like that. So I kind of wanted to talk about the space. What are kind of your thoughts on like the current state of open mics in the city?
Man, I think there's a lot of really good-hearted people that are taking up the mantle in a lot of different respects. I think that one of the things that I really admired, especially or really about anybody that takes on the project of doing something in the city that kind of brings artists out, is just the maintaining like the consistent organizer phase of something. Because as you know, if you're doing like a showcase, it's like, okay, I'm in the organizer phase of my life for the next 3 months maybe, that you're like planning out the large event. The event happens and then you get to be like a normal civilian yet again. Whereas if somebody is in the city and they're like, okay, I want to do an open mic, I want to create a space that is a especially if you're doing something weekly, but I mean some of them do bi-weekly or even monthly, but where you're creating a consistent space for people to express and really be open and vulnerable. That's admirable, especially if you're doing it the right way, which I see a lot of in the city. So I'm always super excited for to see like a new open mic pop up. I think one of the things that a lot of people run into, and I've actually seen it happen in other cities, is almost this idea that you like these are competing open mics. You know what I mean? Where you're like, okay, well, my night is, this is where all the artists come out, and you don't really have the bandwidth for other, artists or anything like that. But I think one of the things that you kind of really quickly end up finding when you're creating an open mic is that you start creating like a culture around the space that you're making, and that culture can be consistent and completely different than maybe the next open mic. And I think people, they value those things as different experiences to the point where it's like, okay, it's not just, oh, do I go to this open mic or do I go to this open mic? It's like you're essentially picking the culture that you really kind of want to be a part of on a consistent basis. Or a lot of people go to both, or a lot of people go to multiple. I know when I first started, so when little bit of like history on me, when I first started, when I first got introduced kind of to the poetry community in Columbus, I think I was going to like, I want to say it was like 4 or 5 open mics a week. Like actually, it was like 4 open mics a week, unless it was like the weeks where there was 5, and I would be going to 5. Some nights there would be like multiples in one night, and I would like go to both, which was an incredibly tiring endeavor, because I had like a full-time job at that time too. So I was like going to work, and then after work, it's like I'm going to the open mic, and then I get home at, I don't know, sometimes 11:30, midnight, and then going to sleep and getting back to work. So it's like, it I think it was a space that really molded me as an artist, and really molded me as a burgeoning extrovert in those spaces, and really helped me become, the kind of artist or the kind of performer that I am, because I just really exposed myself to as many audiences as I could. And I think that, I think kind of the other side to that, and this isn't on anybody in particular as much as it is, one of the things that I always talk about is like kind of figuring out like the reason why you'd want to create a show, or the reason why you want to create an open mic. I know for you, I know that, you had the open mic, the like we did like the Versus open mic, but then like you've also like hosted shows, and I think that one of the things that like we talked about a lot, there was an event that you actually specific had. It was for biracial people. What was it called?
The Other Box.
The Other Box. Yeah. So like I think I remember I was talking to another artist in the city even about that event, and thinking that like that's one of the things that's like really important to figuring out if you should start something. Like, are you creating something that has a tangible, unique need? You know what I mean? Or even just a need. Like a lot of people, I remember I was talking to somebody who started an open mic, and essentially they were just like, yeah, I'm starting the open mic because like I can't go to other open mics. I'm like, well, that's not like, you listen, running an open mic is a lot. Okay. Like, especially if you're doing it fair, if you're even doing it fair, you know what I mean? If you're doing it like somewhat justice, it's a lot of work. And if you're doing it right, it's a lot of work, to both maintain and to really push and to create an atmosphere for. So yeah, I think that, there's kind of a mix of all those things happening. But I mean, for the most part, people are doing it the right way. And I'm by no means like some kind of like great authority on it, as much as I am just, a person that was incredibly benefited by being able to, have like no kids, and just like I'm able to like just be like, if I get very little sleep, it's like whatever, right? I'm like in that like young like era of my life where I'm able to do all those things at once. And so I was just able to really be benefited by being exposed to a huge amount of like open mic environments, able to see some that worked incredibly well, that that as long as the people wanted to do it, then it was going to be successful. And then you also can see the other side of the spectrum, where it's like, oh, like I see the motives for wanting to create something, or this specific space don't really aren't really manifesting like good fruit, but it's because it's like the motives are a little bit off. So yeah, no, I mean, there's always good and opportunity spaces But all in all, I mean, I'm always excited. Like it doesn't take. I take that back. I don't think that it takes anything away from your community for somebody to try to create that kind of space. Because I've actually learned a lot from bad open mic spaces. You know what I mean? Like you learn a lot from those spaces. So even if it's like not a great kind of open mic spaces, like you can still learn a lot. So I don't think that there's too much drawbacks as an artist to somebody creating that space, because you can either go or not go. But it's like if people go and people appreciate it, then it's like yeah, it's there for that.
When you say that bad, like quote unquote bad open mics and things like that, what exactly do you have in mind?
Man, okay, so I got some stories, man. All right, so this was some years ago. We actually went up to, and actually, so this was my first time ever being. Actually, I don't want to name the city because I feel like it'll make it like too specific. It was my first time being in this city, right?
Midwest city. Not too specific. Okay.
Let's just leave it at this. So it was my first time being in the city, and they had this open mic, and so I mean, and at this time, mind you, I mean, this was at this time I maybe had been doing I kind of in the space of consistently going to open mics and performing for I would probably say like 6 to 8 months at this point. I kind of do a lot of that marker around like the time that I would say like JG really started looking at my poems and being like, okay, this is how, this is where you went wrong. This is where we can change. And these are the opportunity spaces to, the spaces where I started performing in other cities. And then I started getting booked and things like that. So yeah, so this is my first time being in this specific, non-specific city, right? And we go there, and the thing is whenever we traveled, it was like always like a group of us. And so we ended up going out to the show, and I remember it being a Friday. Maybe that was too specific, but it was a Friday, guys. So and we're at this show, and it was a show where it took place inside of like kind of this. It was a bar. And one of the things about open mic space is that, especially if you're an organizer, you kind of figure out pretty quickly. And I know
choose
that
the right venue.
Choose the right venue.
Choose the right
That's
venue.
how, it's like, listen, I think a lot of times people get kind of swept up in almost, I would say, like the sales pitch from venue owners, because and it's nothing against venue owners, right? Because like venue owners are like, if you're a person that, if I own this building and it's like somebody comes along saying, hey, I have this thing that if I do it here will bring you however many customers or just people will know about it just because of my event. It's like, of course, as a venue runner, like, it's in your best interest to pitch it like this is the best place for your venue. So, or for your event. But I would definitely say, especially if you're new at picking venue spaces and things like that, like definitely run it by one of your OGs, run it by somebody who's done it a lot, and be like, and just kind of show them the space and be like, okay, if I really wanted to do this kind of event here, like, how would it work? And really, in yourself, run it through your head, like, what does this night look like? Like, what does this sound like? What are the sight lines?
Where are people walking in and
where,
things like that? So, like,
oh my
so
gosh,
get interrupted.
Yeah,
I don't want to be like right next to the door.
yeah, all those things. And I think this event was a very good example of not being the right space. So it already had kind of one thing again. And to be clear, at this time at this time, my experience level was not high enough to even recognize that. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't have told. I wouldn't have known, right? But wherever we would go, it was always so interesting because like JG would like tell like it would be like I'm like this like little brother that's like I'm like almost like tagging along, but it's just like, oh, he got a little jumper, so like definitely put him in the game, like somewhere it's like make sure he gets some shots up in the game, you know what I mean? And so like he would tell people like, hey, this is Matthias, this is Janelle, these are or whoever it is that is around or who came, and he would be like, you know, these people go up, you know what I mean? And like and JG and if anybody, if you know out there, like his name carries weight. So it's like if he says, hey, this person's good, they go up, like they're gonna announce you like, oh, this guy's really good because this guy is saying, you know what I mean? So which is all just to say that like the show itself, the flyer said that it started at 8. Well, the doors open at 8 and the show starts at 9. Which is fair night. It's like a Friday night, you know what I mean? And so it's like, okay, cool. And that's actually not a super unreasonable kind of setup. I mean, as you know, most of the times it's like you have the door and then the show starting an hour, typically like an hour or less from the door.
I'm a fan of like 45 to 30, 45 minutes. An hour is kind of long, but I get it. It's not
it's
unusual.
An hour feels like a hard time for it to happen. So it's like like telling somebody it's like 35 minutes from now, it's like the show's gonna start. Right. It's like it's kind of an odd kind of time. Whereas like if somebody like, because then the thing that some people typically program in their head is like the show starts at 8. You know what I mean? Like that's typically what they program in their head. So hopefully you're gonna get the people that are like, let me make it there within that hour, and then you're gonna get some people that are like, let me make it there by that hour, you know. But yeah, so we get there, and I had and so to note, like I didn't really ever like pay to get into open mics because like we were A, typically traveling, B, I was typically, until people like knew me, you know, I was typically like with JG, and JG did, like if you see JG, you're like, it's a benefit to your show for JT to perform in front of your audience during this show. So it's like, of course. And so for a long time, I was like essentially like performing Entourage almost. It was like I was kind of coming in there and also performing, and you know, I would like, if I would do well, and then people would be like, absolutely come back. And so the next time I would go to that show, they would just be like, oh, just like wave them in. So like for a really long time, I never knew like the prices to get into shows or to get into open mics or anything like that, especially like outside of the city, outside of Columbus. So we get there, we go in, and it was the first event that I ever went to where I got like patted down. Like they did the whole make sure all this other stuff. Because again, I want to give y'all like as loosely specific kind of layout of kind of what this space was. Essentially, like we were, and I want to be clear, like everybody involved is perfectly nice, kind, great people, but
friendliest pat down
I mean, that's how they made sure that this is like you left all the outside, but yeah, so we get in there, and when I'm seeing the venue, it's like it's confusing to me because I'm like, okay, there's no particular stage area, but they essentially kind of makeshifted a stage area. But here's kind of what I would say is kind of the hard thing to do with poetry shows, and that is with open mics. It's hard to do a kind of direct kind of mix between comedy and poetry for an open mic. It's actually
so it's a comedy open mic poetry kind of thing.
It was a comedy and poetry open mic.
That's a hard.
And I want to be clear. The thing is, it's like on each of their merits, they would have been good. Like I would have went. I mean, maybe even had a pretty solid time at a poetry open mic with all those same poets. And then at the same time, like I like going to comedy open mics. I would have had a great time at a comedy open mics with all those comedians. But it's like you got to understand, like poetry is a little bit of a different. Well, actually, I'll take that back. A lot of people's poems are a little bit are a much different animal than like what you can really put inside of a comedy showcase, because it's like they're way different topically, and the rhythm of it is really way different. And it was also odd because it was like it created this like dichotomy, almost like poetry versus comedy. So like that was kind of the point. And at this time, I didn't really have any funny poems at all. So I never even wrapped my head around writing funny poems, which is like weird because that's like all I do now. But so like to me, I'm like, we're in completely different universes. Like, why are we like this? Doesn't make a lot of sense. But it was so like they split that dichotomy so clearly that it was like two different hosts too. So there's like a poetry host and a comedy host, and I'm like, I don't even know, because the thing is like in the space of being like a comedy host, I'm like, that should be your only host. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's like, I don't even know what a poetry host would be if you're like, okay, I can't do the things that a comedy host does, and maybe the comedy host is like funny and lighthearted. And I'm like, what is the other thing? So yeah, so that show happens, and there's also this thing where it's like, I think it can do you a lot of good for you to have a time where you have to be out of the venue that's early, right? So
by early, what do you mean?
let's say if your show starts at let's say your show starts at 9, which means your doors open at 8, so maybe you're allowed to be in there at 7:30. Like maybe that's when the venue's like, okay, because the space didn't require a ton of setup. It actually required zero setup, and that might have been a part of the issue. But there was no setup kind of involved here, so yeah, and the space was a little bit odd because it was like the bar was like in the center of the space, right? So it was like there was like this large bar area, but then people were all sitting around it, and then like kind of the stage was like kind of in the front corner. So people that were essentially listening and engaging with work were sitting kind of all around this thing, and it was a fairly large space, and it was like not the best lit. So it was like you're probably going to get some distractions here and there, and because of the fact that there's already comedy happening, it's like the interaction or how you interact with comedy and how you interact with poems are very different. And how the performers interact with you is incredibly different. So yeah, it was asking a lot of the audience, I think. And it was asking a lot of the space. But so yeah, we've talked about venue, we've talked about kind of I think the again, like, so time wise, I think one of the things that was a little bit kind of made that space a little bit off was just the fact that I think that because they didn't really have a time window, and I also think that like essentially the host was very familiar with a lot of the people that came, and also the host drank a little bit during the show, so it was like there was really lax on time and people's time. And again, this was like an open mic, mind you. One of the people that was on the open mic, they like kind of knew the host and stuff like that. And it was a comedian. They did a 45-minute set in the mid, and it's like, it would be different if it was like, hey, we're all coming to see this guy, but it was like a guy that came up for the open mic, and it was just like, it was legitimately a 45-minute set. And I'm not, because like parts of it were good, but it was clearly not an intentional 45 minutes. It wasn't like I planned a 45-minute set. It was like, I'm just gonna keep talking. I did my 10 minutes, but if I keep talking, I can still be funny.
Feeling it,
yeah. So that was a little bit much. So essentially, yeah, that was just like a huge chunk of the night, and it was just so funny because I had this. There was 2 artists that were with us that actually came with us because they came with us from the show the day before, and that we were actually bringing them up to that city so that they could perform there, and they can get the bucket and get the money and stuff like that. And so it was just so strange because it was like we brought them up there, and it was just like they were supposed to be kind of the quasi features. I don't know if I can't remember if they're actually on the bill, but it's like we talked to the host, and the host was like, yeah, they can be the feature. They can have this feature spot. And so their spot was legitimately, I think, 25 minutes. like that, and it had a conjoined set, so it was both of them performing at the same time. And so like their entire set was like 25 minutes, and then like his was like 45 minutes. And so again, yeah, I think if you're a host who's like, I have a certain window of time to, and I have to be done by the certain window of time, it makes you more cognizant. And actually
100%.
like even if this is your cousin, your best friend, or whatever, you're like, hey, it's been 8 minutes, get it done, right? So there's that. So it's so funny. So, and this was a much younger version of me, and a version of me that's like, I'm trying to perform on every single mic, and I'm still am to that to a degree, but not as much as I should be probably. But especially at this time, I was like, man, I want to perform on every single microphone that I can. Like, I want to like work this material out. I really want to like figure out new ways to perform this piece, and all this other stuff. And so, and picture that version of me. I went through this entire show. I went through multiple comedians, poets. Like some of them I actually really liked, but then like a lot of them were like, oh man, this is a lot. I went through a 45-minute stand-up act, and went through a lot of stuff. And then at the end, essentially, like they forgot to like call me, and it was now. And when I say they forgot to call me, I mean it was 12:30 at night, and they're like, she's like starting to talk about wrapping it up, and then she looks at me, and then she's like, oh, but okay, we brought this amazing young man and all this stuff. And like, so, and she introduced me, and like, I think I'm pissed at first because she's already starting to give her, thank you everybody for coming speech, next one, this and all this other stuff. And so I'm thinking like, yeah, she forgot, and like I'm much less forgiving of stuff like that at this time in my like space, and that was probably a thing that I had to work through. But she ends up calling me after I had already kind of worked myself into a lather, and I performed, and people really rocked with it, and people came up to me, we connected and all this other stuff. So that was good. But like the road there was a lot, and again, it was 12:30 at night at that point, so it was also like, man, it's really late. Yeah, so that's just like one story. I can probably tell you about 50. And to be clear, that here's the thing. I think one of the things that I am able to like say like really openly is like most of the the shows that I've ever ran or hosted or been part of, like I had the benefit of being able to like be part of the nest and watch JG, who also is somebody who, for years did traveling poetry as a living. And so he was able to collect these stories and these lessons, and he was able, like, he graciously like imparted them to me. And he was like, hey, so if you're running a show, don't do this, do this, do this. Like, and so and he did that with a lot of us in Columbus, to the extent that it's like a lot of the mistakes that you might see shows make are kind of a byproduct of like maybe they didn't have the kind of lessons and stuff like that. So I recognize maybe like a lot of the spaces where I was able to benefit from some things that I didn't have to go out there and hustle for the experience in. But a lot of it I did, hustle for the experience in. But yeah. Which is, I'll just say, like, yeah, there's ways to have a bad open mic. There absolutely is. But that's not even necessarily say that it can't be a beneficial experience, because there might be somebody, it's a lesson for you as a host and an organizer, and hopefully you take the right lessons away from that. And it's also, might be something for an artist out there that's like, man, you got to go through some stuff in order to, maybe this is a story that you tell on a podcast in years.
I want to touch on some of those things. Just a quick note here from Viral Essence. Thanks for checking us out. Saying they wrote their book, A Spoken Word to Jazz. I stutter. So I paid a producer to do Audible. That's so interesting. Because I feel like people would still be very interested in, if it's your work, hearing your own voice. But I certainly understand I don't want to say like I feel almost like nervousness or fear. I don't know about like how people would react to the stuttering, but I guess it depends on the severity. I don't know.
Yeah, and I can definitely see it both ways. But I mean, whichever direction, really, because I also think that there's a lot of people that aren't maybe as comfortable with like their voice or their tone or anything like that. And I mean, that's where like voice actors, I mean, they get a lot of work, and that's actually it's a good symbiotic relationship.
I would say I do think that there are places where people would be more than welcoming and accepting of that, but I think it depends on the venue. It depends on the space. You got to find that place where you feel comfortable.
Yeah, that's definitely fair.
But to go back to kind of some things that you mentioned just with the open mics, it sounds like, I mean, you even mentioned this, that the host was, or the person who organized the show, assuming they were the host, was putting a lot of demands on their audience. And in a lot of ways, it actually really isn't fair to the audience. I think what they were expecting them to do, even just having that split between comedy and poetry. I mean, that's your audience that is coming out for comedy is not your same audience in general that's coming out for poetry. And I think that trying to blend that, unless you're doing some very specific marketing to be like, hey, this is, if you are into comedy and poetry, this is the thing. Because like, most people aren't. Poetry is very niche. Comedy is niche too, but I think if we're talking about like general people, I think if I'm just pulling someone off the street, I feel like for your average regular person, and I'd love to be wrong about this, so if you think I'm wrong, let me know. But I feel like if you say, hey, here's like a free comedy show to check out versus, hey, here's a free like poetry show to check out, I feel like comedy is a little bit more accessible to people.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you have like funny like not even just like when we're talking about media, like if your friend is like, man, this is like a funny guy, that can be anybody, and that can be like the guy that, or the person that you really like hanging out with. But if somebody's like, oh, this is like the poetry guy, it's like well, do poems at your poem place then. So yeah, it's I can definitely see it. I definitely see your point, and I would actually absolutely agree with you. Like comedy is a much better circulated medium.
People are much more primed for comedy than they are for poetry. Even if you've never been to like a comedy club or something like that, you've seen, stand up, you've heard someone do stand up, like whether it's on like a Netflix special or something, you've heard it. Whereas there's plenty of people out there who have never heard someone recite a poem.
Yeah, comedy is also like a much more it's like the effect of comedy is like a guttural reaction. It's like it's like, man, I remember talking to, this was like a while ago. I used to, or I guess I still do when the program comes back. But it was this program where we were talking to the youth. Frank, actually, he was part of it. And I remember we're like kind of talking about like, kids like wanting to kind of get into comedy. And I'm like, one of the things that is really important is like the things that, the reasons that you're funny, or the reasons that people are going to find you funny, are often not going to be as well explainable as like somebody's, this is why I like this poem. You know what I mean? So you can probably list like kind of the line breaks and the meter and all this, whatever it is that you want to when it comes to your poem. But a lot of stuff like like physical comedy, you know what I mean? You can there's like so many different ways that it's so much more embedded into your everyday life than just like the instances or the spaces where you're going to really encounter poems or the poetry devices. But yeah.
And I mean, on top of that, just in terms of, it seems like the arrangement for the venue, I mean, bars, fine. I mean, there are bars that host open mics, but having that central location for the bar, it seems like it's so, that space sounds so ripe for distraction.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I want to distinct as well is that like, and this is for any, and I'm saying this as a person who, especially at that time, had a lot less experience with that being an issue that a show has. Like, I had been to other spaces where like the show was training the audience. I had other spaces where the problem was like everything was perfect, but the lighting was terrible. I had things where it was like sound, like the positioning, because like it was like near an airport. It's like these are all things that are kind of like different issues that you have to tackle. I think the interesting thing is that the audience that was there for comedy had a higher threshold for the things that were happening in that space than I think the people that were there for poems. And again, I think it just speaks to the space that a poetry open mic more or less creates, as opposed to what a comedy open mic creates. And I also think that like vulnerability is treated incredibly differently in either space, because it's like, you could be kind of like in most of the like the comedy open mics, it's like if somebody shares like a really deep and like cutting story, it's like the thing that they're doing is making a joke out of it, you know what I mean? So it's like they're turning it into comedy, which, I mean, I love comedians, you know what I'm saying, but like some of the wildest people that you ever meet in your entire life. And so I think that a lot of times it's like it's their specific way of processing pain and processing angst and frustration and all those emotions that everybody, poets included, process, but how they're handled by the audience and how they're handled, like if somebody shared like their really traumatic story through their poem and I just like busted out laughing, I would like probably get kicked out the venue. But it's like these comedians, they're doing it, and like the goal that they're trying to hit is like for you to laugh at some point, or to laugh at whatever it's like, to laugh either at the setup, through the setup, or towards the end at somewhere at the punchline. So they're just really, really different spaces, which is just to say that when we're talking about like its effect on the audience, or kind of what the audience was getting, it's like I agree. I absolutely agree about the space in specific, because it was also like, because the sightlines weren't direct for a lot of these things, it's like if I'm having a conversation with you, and like as opposed to like me looking at you, I'm looking like this way, it's like maybe I get distracted by things that are like out here, and like when you're talking, like maybe I'm able to listen to you fairly well, but like it's not going to be as maybe direct as if I'm like, okay, looking at you, let's make eye contact and let's have this discussion. So I think that's maybe like that was kind of what was happening there. But it was like there's like an ambiance factor there as well. So it's not even just the sight lines and stuff like that. It's also like it felt like kind of like a social kind of club atmosphere that you kind of stuck a microphone in and said, hey, as opposed to sitting on this couch that's over here on this stool, like pay attention to this corner of the room that you can't really quite see, but like there's things that are happening over there. So yeah, I think that I mean, from what I could tell, people had a fair time, but it was also like, if I don't think it was anything like if you were trying to create like a poetry space and you're like, okay, I want to really bring the poetry culture into the space, or try to add my contribution to the poetry culture, like that wouldn't have been the space, because I don't think that was it. It seemed like that was their pronounced goal, like that's what they were saying, but it also seems like that might have been like a marketing thing. It's like, this is the poetry open mic where you get to do your poems. But it was like the only component of that I think was catering to that was the fact that there was a microphone and there would be people. So it's like the thing that you could do on the microphone is poems or whatever, you know what I mean? But yeah.
One of the things you also mentioned too is that you were there, you were listening to the pubs, and you're like, oh, and some of them were pretty good. But I think it also kind of speaks to when you go to an open mic, what are you expecting from the poetry?
I don't think I have a direct expectation, if I'm being honest.
Mm.
I think I really like being in open mic spaces. Like I like the concept of an open mic. Like it's more than just like kind of being able to go and like hang out. I like the concept of like of I I really appreciate the concept of somebody brand new, not really knowing what to expect. Maybe this is a person that, you know, they work a typical 9 to 5. Like sometimes you get people that this was their one night out this month because they got like 3 4 kids at home and they're usually working, and this isn't even really their thing. But I used to write poems when I was in middle school and high school, and I gave it up because, you know, I took this career path, or I had these kids, or I had this lifestyle, or I was some man. Like we've seen people that they went to prison and they were just they were locked out. They were locked up for a while. Then they kind of come out, and it is something that it's what public speaking is one of the people's like greatest fears, and it's a kind of it's an odd thing to do because what for a very long time for you to have an individual audience where it's like you are the person that's speaking and everybody is dedicated to listening to your voice. It's like it was a very rare instance for anybody to ever experience that. You know what I mean? And then people would hyperventilate when, oh my god, people are gonna, and like there's like people that, you know, we saw, you know, shout out to Writer's Block that just concluded last year. Like we've seen people that it'd be if there's 30 people on the list, it'd be like 15 16 people that they've never performed on the mic before ever in their life. And they made this decision. Some of them, there'd be people that get there and they make that decision that day. Like they wake up that morning and they say, you know what, this is the day that I'm gonna do it. There's some people that are like, I've been practicing this poem in the mirror for all month trying to put this thing together and figure it out. So it's like, yeah, man, it's just, you don't know what you're gonna get with an open mic, and you don't really. I mean, you could get somebody. I don't. I myself personally, I've been to. There was like this open mic that opened up in the city. I don't even know if it's still running. I can't remember the name of it. It's not. It was kind of. I think it was on the east side. But yeah, it at the time that I went there, it had happened like 3 times, and I go there just because it was my first time ever seeing the flyer, and I said, "Hey, like I'm gonna stop through, check it out." And it was really refreshing because it was like nobody knew me. Well, I guess no, one girl did know; she recognized me, and she was just like, "Oh, are you gonna perform?" And but it felt good because like there wasn't. And most people in the audience didn't know who I was, and so and I was actually working on poems for something else, and so I was like, yeah, I'll take this space to kind of experience this new thing and kind of perform here. And the thing that the audience doesn't know is like, okay, I do poems a lot, right? So it's like I go there and I'm able to kind of be in the back and kind of watch their culture, you know, their open mic culture happen around me. And then, you know, the host is like, any other performance, anybody else want to perform? I know, brother, you seem like you got a poem in you. Are you a poet? And I said, you know, I do a little bit of poems. It was like, and they did the same thing that we typically do. Oh, you're a poet. Yeah, I know you got a couple ones. And so it was just it felt so fun because it was like he's just introducing me like, you know, I'm kind of, I don't really know too much about this space. I go up there onto the open mic and he's like adjusting the microphone for me. And I was just like, oh yeah, I appreciate it. So he adjusts the microphone for me. And then I perform the Denzel poem, matter of fact. And I perform a poem, and then it's like you kind of see like the guy's like, oh, what? I didn't know that you actually had a poem. Like that's actually kind of nuts. But yeah, like that happens all the time in open mic spaces where you don't really know what you're gonna get, and then like, oh, this person blows your mind, and then I mean, I again, even if it's not that exact experience, if it's an experience where somebody, again, this is a brand new experience for them, and they get up on the mic and they do that, I'm like, that's incredibly brave, especially when they're like sharing like really deep thoughts about themselves and about their lives and whatever they choose to put into their work. So I'm like, I really love the concept. I really love the thought of what the open mic is. Yeah.
When do you think poets like tend to like stop going to open mics? Like they're just some out there and it's like, oh wow, like I was not expecting to see you at an open mic anymore.
Oh, like why poets go to open mics a lot and then like they stop going to open mics after that?
That, and I also think, I feel like if we think of like poetry like a career trajectory, like I feel like you see the farther people get along, the less likely they are to go to an open mic.
I think there could probably be a couple different reasons. I know for me, I don't go to as many open mics, but it's also typically when you, at least for me, I can speak to my own experience. When I started going to open mics, I was going to like 4 or 5 shows a week, and I was just really, really tired all the time because I also had like a full-time job, and we would like do random like trips out to Akron and Dayton and Cincy, and go to these other, like we would literally drive out to I would get off of work at 5 p.m. and then JG would pick me up from, like, I would go home, and then JG would, sometimes we would just take my car. So like JG would come up, he would come over to my apartment, and then we would leave straight from my apartment to Akron, and then like maybe I would sleep in the car while he drove, or vice versa, and then we'd get to the show, perform at the show. Like either I would have, like whenever we went there, like either I would have a feature, or maybe JG would have a feature, or Janelle would have, or anybody that was with us, and then we would literally just pack up and go back. And then still with all that, it's like, because like Amplified, shout out to Amplified, his shows are on Tuesday, so it's like Wednesday morning, it's like if I get home at like 2 a.m., like I'm waking up like super. So it's like there's a lot of energy, like it just, anything that takes that kind of energy, it's like you have to have some very specific circumstances to kind of sustain. And so I know for me, it was like I got a different job. I got married, like just different responsibilities, different stuff that's happening in my life. That's like, okay, I have to be a little bit smarter about my energy and about where stuff goes. And so I just think life happens to a lot of people. I think I can definitely see somebody who's like, I know a few people that are really kind of big in the poetry space, that like going to an open mic in some ways for them feels like work. You know what I mean? It feels like, man, like I do poems all the time. Like maybe they've been able to get to a space which is like beautiful, but you've gotten to a space where like your poems are like, that's what you do for work. So like the kind of escapism that open mics might be for some people isn't really the same, and it might be enjoyable in small doses and stuff like that, but once you are like, okay, you're doing it all the time, it might revert back to feeling like work, or it might revert to feeling like, I need to do other experiences. Like you can't just have like, I spent all day with poems and I'm working on this large poem project, and maybe I'm in some kind of MFA, and maybe I'm doing this, and the third. And then like at night, what also you're doing? You're also going to open mics. It's like, that's a lot. So it can be any number of reasons. I know some people that, there's like people that I think there's some cases where people can kind of feel maybe a bit of animosity towards maybe like if you've been doing it for long enough, because like I think a lot of times people try to almost inorganically kind of grow themselves as like a poetry personality. And the thing that I think a lot of times happens is like, you're like, I've been going to open mics for 6 months, and one person knew like how my, or maybe there's a room full of people that knows how your poems go, but it's like, it's the people that know you, people that rock with you, people that are your friends already, you know. And so like maybe you're like, I should be bigger, I should be this, I should, you know what I mean? Like that kind of happens. To with a lot of people, and their personalities aren't the kind of personality that you can be like, okay, well, I can still go to this open mic and kind of enjoy myself and not feel, you know, boxed in. And I think my advice to those people would be like probably don't think that. Like I think a lot of times people are like, they start getting like really, really frustrated with, you know, why I'm not famous already with my poems. And I'm just like, yeah, like if that was the goal with like your poems, then like that is probably the reason that it's not happening. You know what I mean? But who the heck knows, right? But I know that can happen, and I've seen it happen. And then they end up, you know, cooling off, and then they come back, and then they're like, oh, I just had to get a little low and get a little humble, live a little bit, and then get some new material, figure some stuff out.
It's been a while since I've been to open mics regularly, and that like act of like discovering like a poet for the first time, where it's like, oh wow, like that was a really like legit line, or like this is, you know, they have some really solid work. I think is really, you know, it's just such a wonderful feeling. I feel like for me with open mics, that occurrence has become less and less. And I think it's
like the occurrence of you like finding
finding that like go to open mic, you know, some open mics, you know, they'll have, you know, 15, 20 people on the list. And like on a good night, like I'm going to really get that feeling for, you know, 2, 3, 4 poets. But there's a lot, but there were, just based on the last couple of open mics I went to, the amount of times that I left with that sort of feeling was much, much less.
That's fair. What do you think is the is maybe a or one of the contributing factors?
You know, I think the people who go into open mics are kind of, you hit on a lot of them, like people who wake up and like, you know, I want to get this off my chest, or I've never written before, so now I'm trying this out, you know, which is great. I'm glad that we have these spaces that exist for people to not only share that expression, but also feel welcome to share that expression too. I think at the same time, you know, if you have an open mic that's dominated by that sort of work, for me right now, it's just not what I'm looking for. Like I think it's great that people are doing that. I want more people involved in poetry. But we're also talking about work that can very easily fall into cliche, and you know, we're all writing the same poems. Everyone's written those poems before, you know, and I think I don't need to hear that poem again.
You already have that guy.
You know, and it's on the one hand, it's horrible to say that, but then at the same time, it's the open mics I've seen, or let me put it this way, I don't think that a lot of open mics are necessarily pushing for their poets to delve deeper into their own work. I think a lot of open mics are existing more as just a platform to showcase your work. And I think one of the things that, you know, why I started the Verses and why we started our own, you know, open mic a bit back last year, was I wasn't just interested in hearing the poems that you're doing now, but also kind of see how are you putting in the work for the next time you set foot on the stage? What are you be doing differently? And I don't think a lot of open mics are invested in that sort of development of people. And the more I kind of look at myself and where I want to be in the future, whether for that education or for that motivation aspect, the more I find that open mics for me are falling flat.
Yeah, I think and I would say especially before. I mean, I think it's so interesting because it was like before the pandemic, kind of like March of 2020. Before that, when things were a great degree more like kind of regular, I would say. Like I remember distinctly like the feeling of going to, and it's not necessarily comparing because that's not necessarily what it is. I think one of the things that really challenged me as an artist, one of the people that challenged me as an artist incredibly consistently is Zach Hanna. Like I think one of the things that like and like yourself, Jordan, there's a lot of artists that like I'm kind of Sue Flat, man. There's just a ton of artists that every week the thing I'm going to the open mic and I'm going to like writer's block and I'm going there with an expectation of, I'm going to see some new people. I'm going to see some people that I've seen before, kind of see what people are working on. But man, like what the heck has Zach been up to? Like what has happened? What is he doing now? And kind of what did he put together? Like what is going on in his head? Or and that happens with like a ton of other artists. Again, like I said, like you included. I think, man, and it felt a lot more direct when we're talking about like the Ness. For me at least, man, I think it's because it was it's still black. It was a blacker audience, right? The last day of Black History Month. I just want to get it out. It was a much blacker audience, but which is just to say that I think that there was a little bit more of a comfort level to I think the way that we interacted around like performances and kind of admitting like, I'm trying to show out. Like, look what I got. Look at the new stuff I got. So I remember like before shows, like the thing about like me and Jay, like me and JG like are friends. Like that's like he was like the best man at my wedding. Like we're friends in like real life. You know what I mean? So it's like before the shows, I'm over here telling him like, yo, I think I got one. I think I got something crazy, man. Like, I don't know. I'm gonna figure it out. Like, I still gotta figure some stuff out. The first time I did the Denzel poem was at the Nest. And I'm thinking to myself, like, man, I don't know exactly what this thing is, man, but like I think it's something good. Like, let's figure it out. And he was and, he'd be like, yeah, let's figure it out. And then I perform it, and then you might have people being like, oh, I really, really rock with that poem. And then people, I remember I did the Jesus versus Satan battle rap poem, and then like people were coming, oh, I want to do the Satan part. I'm like, what? It's like I think there was like a much more kind of openness to like, I really, really rock with that poem, man. Like, man, let me like I gotta come with it next week and stuff like that. And I think I think with some people it can like you can kind of have that kind of relationship with the work with, because I don't even think that's necessarily negative. I actually think one of the problems is that thought is kind of an undercurrent as opposed to being like just spoken. You can't really just say like, dang man, I need to work on, like I can't, like a lot of times you can't come up to an artist like that your colleagues like this is your these are your contemporaries and be like, dang, I gotta step it up because of what you're working on. Like clearly I'm not in my bag enough. I gotta figure something else over here, because I think the feeling is not, it's just not the same. So which is all just to say that yeah, like I think that if that was a much more pronounced kind of feeling in a lot of spaces, and maybe that's just and maybe that's just a different feeling because of what happens in primarily Black spaces amongst Black people. But yeah, just when we're at the Nest, it was like, and I want to be clear, I have plenty of bad poems, and plenty of bad poems that I didn't know were bad poems until I performed them, and I was like, oh crap, this is a terrible poem. And like maybe you're blinded by it, man. I have this one line in here that's really amazing, and I can't wait to get that line off, but it's like underneath a whole bunch of crap, maybe. And so yeah, so it's just like this thought that you kind of went into this space knowing that you you want to hopefully create work that people like and people remember and people are fans of and people rock with. And it's like, that can be any number of things, but it's the thing that it's probably not is kind of what you were saying. It's not just I just want to showcase whatever, because it's like, that whatever is not going to go over well in this room. You know what I mean? It's like, maybe I'm doing this not even just for, like, I'm doing it for myself, but like, I'm planning on performing other places, and I have other things to do with my poems than open mics. You know what I mean? And if like that is the case, then it's perhaps like you're perhaps not the kind of person that would be like, as long as I got it off, as long as I'm free of it. Like, now it's like, maybe you're the person that's like, oh, you guys didn't clap, you guys didn't like that. Okay, like, now I have to start figuring out if there's an issue, and if there is an issue, what to fix and what to work on. Because like, I've never really seen open mics as like, this is the show for me, as much as like, this is where I work on this material and I put it together to get to the next step. And so, yeah, when more people are looking at it like this is the destination for the work, then it's like, a lot of times it feels like there's not a huge amount of investment in kind of like crafting it and working on the craft, as much as it is, I got it out now, next week I can not think about this thing anymore. So yeah, if you can, I would highly advise if you can kind of create that space between each other's work. I also think it's a weird thing. So this is a weird thing to say. I'm gonna say it. I think a lot of times people are maybe too kind with each other about their work, because, man, if I get it, if JG he calls me up there and he tells me he's like, because it's been very rare instances where JG's telling me what to perform. Typically, JG is saying, read the room, do your thing. But in the instances where he's like told me what to perform, it's like because he knows like, okay, this is what's going to go over well in this room or whatever. Which is all just to say that like, if you can create that kind of space where it's like people are like looking forward towards your work, looking forward towards like specific pieces, what you comprise and stuff like that, like create that space in your show where like people are really trying to create really dynamic work. Because yeah, it just means that like, you can't even sit on it for too long. So I can't be like, okay, I only have these couple poems and like, that's it. Like if I do the Denzel poem 4 weeks straight, it's like at some point people are going to be like, okay, we get it. Where's the rest of the guys? And so, so it kind of creates a space where like it's competitive. You have, and not even necessarily competitive with each other, but competitive with, competitive with each other. Just being like, I don't want to create, work like you, but I want to create work that is experimental and can refine itself over time. Like maybe this version of it is not the best version, but it is something new, something creative, and like you're in a space where you're consistently being challenged and confronted with that. And I think a lot of spaces are really, they're doing the other thing, which is, oh man, that's every poem. That was such a great piece. I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this, and you really, really loved it. And I'm like, maybe listen, maybe that's fine for a lot of spaces. Maybe that's all you can. That's the threshold for a lot of spaces. But yeah, I mean, for my personal taste, like if I create a bad, if I wrote a poem that, even if my wife was like, yeah, that you could do better. We could figure something out with this piece, or maybe this piece has some good bones, but you put a lot of stuff around it. So yeah, I think it's definitely advantageous for you to create a space where people are really looking to push themselves creatively.
Yeah, I think it's hard because I apply
Grudges?
standards. Like what I expect of my own poems, I project onto other people's poems, and that's not.
I think they know that,
and that's not very.
I think the people know that. The people have started a petition actually about that exact thing, Jeff.
It's not fair, and I know it's not fair. But at the same time, because of that, it makes it harder for me to, I think, dig in more into other people's work.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the thing that I try to do, especially when we're talking about like editing work and we're talking about like kind of working on not even necessarily editing people's work in specific, but what I hope people do with their work is like I just want man, do you know how like if you're like okay, you know about Dragon Ball Z, right?
A little bit.
Okay. So in Dragon Ball Z, this is for the audience out there. Maybe you know about Dragon Ball Z and how Dragon Ball Z is a direct analog to creating new poems, right? But in Dragon Ball Z, like each of the characters, you get power ups, and the Saiyans are the ones that the show is focused on primarily. But the Saiyans, they get power ups right throughout this course of the series that make they become stronger and all this other stuff. And so I think that like what happens a lot of times is like I'm like you're like a Super Saiyan, like, and you're like, man, like I've performed at this show and at this event, and I have work here and here and here. And like, so the way that I'm thinking about everybody's work is like, you have to become a Super Saiyan like me, right? Like, you have to also get powerful. And I think one of the things that does
and
is
you want to. It's kind of like a projecting. Like,
yeah, but it's like, but it's also like for that power to go in the same direction. Actually, because maybe a better example of this is My Hero Academia. Like, essentially, okay.
I know nothing about this, so you'll have to explain.
Okay. I try to make it as essentially in this world, it's like there's people that have quirks, and quirks are powers, but everybody has their own like individual power, right? So it's not like some people have. There's like a guy that has ice power. Like there's a guy that has both his ice and fire powers. There's a guy who's super strong, people that are stretchy, all this other stuff. But if you are a person that's like, okay, I have super strong powers, like my goal shouldn't be, if I'm taking somebody under my tutelage, if somebody's like, okay, I need help working on my power, it's like, I'm like, okay, this is how you become strong like me. It's like, because maybe your quirk is like being like invisible. So like, how do you make that a better, stronger power? Like, what do you do to expand that? And I think a lot of times poets can, and you see it all the time in poetry. If you're outside of a poetry community and you're out on the outside looking in, like you can kind of see it sometimes if you go to an open mic and you see all the regulars, and like all the regulars essentially perform in a way that's somewhat similar to like maybe the host and like the house poets, like the way that they perform, like their movements on stage, or maybe the how their poems are constructed. Like you can say like, oh, I see what happened here. Like people saw either people saw the things that worked and they were just like, I'm just going to do what works in this space. Or what happens a lot of times is like those people, like the people at the forefront, they become the essentially the teachers and the people that are helping people with their poems in that space. And so essentially they turn everybody into versions of themselves.
Yeah.
And I think with me for a really long time, that was like, now I want to say it was exactly like me, but there was like definitely some spaces where I was like, yeah, I wasn't really creating work that I liked or that was me. I was creating work that I was like, oh, like this is what works. This is how I poet in spaces. And it wasn't until I was like, and until I could admit that I didn't like a lot of my poems. And then I was like, but this is how I actually talk. And this is the kind of poems that I would create, that I started writing things that I actually really liked. So, yeah, so it's kind of like that. It's like straddling that line to like, okay, these are the standards and this is the thing that I expect or that I want out of my work. And then being able to take that and be like, well, I can't put that exact thing onto your work. I don't want to make your work sound like mine as much as I want your work to be the best version of your superpower that we can make it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I also My Hero Academia. I really like that show.
I think it's even more like, not just that I want your I want the poem you're writing to do the best for that poem that it can be. But
Yeah.
I also want you to want that for your poem.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't. I think especially I think a lot of people aren't necessarily interested. Like poetry's the hobby. Poetry's like the thing you do on the side. It's not like I'm not
Yeah.
in terms because it's a time commitment, it's a craft. It's something you spend time on. It's an investment, and not everyone's willing to put in that investment. To put it a little bit, but they'll write new poems, but not necessarily be striving for that poem. Like they obviously want to have a good poem, right?
Yeah.
But not necessarily putting in the work to really produce a level of work that's much higher than where they're currently at.
Yeah, no, I definitely, and it's a hard barrier for a lot of people to break is knowing that there's probably a much better version of a poem as well as a poet in there somewhere. You know what I mean? It's kind of odd because it's like poetry is as far as the way that it looks from the outside in, it's subjective almost to a point of like there is a lot of people that if you go to an open mic would get like 0 claps, 0 anything, but it's like they could start a YouTube channel, they could start Twitter, and like they get thousands, hundreds of thousands. So it's like it's kind of almost like what is good?
What is good? Yeah, right.
Kind of in that that dynamic, and it's almost like a lot of people would be like, if you were good to the standards that I maybe hold, like maybe you would have less, because it's like maybe what's your goal? Like, is your goal to have like a ton of followers and stuff like that? It's like maybe, because if that is, then maybe the thing that you're doing is more of a marketing tool than anything else. Which that could either. That can go in really either direction.
That's interesting you bring that up because I want to see if I can find it.
He's going into ChatGPT and asking it to tell us a poem.
No.
He's going to grade it, and when ChatGPT takes over humankind, eventually it'll be like Jeff is the first person to look for it. I heard what you said about my poem, Jeff.
So like that idea about defining what's a good poem. So for instance, we may have talked about this already, but I need to double check the numbers. But supposedly, the Pulitzer Prize winning book in 2014 sold. Don't look at my screen. How many copies? The Pulitzer Prize winning book in 2014 sold
200.
A little bit more, actually.
400.
400 copies.
400 copies.
The Pulitzer Prize winning book.
Like before or after?
Like in total. Maybe
like
not
in total, like to date.
Sold less than 400 copies. Man. Pulitzer Prize winning book in 2014 sold less than 400. So I mean, I get it. Like how are we defining good? And I think this goes back to standards, and again, applying my own, because there are lots of books of poetry that have sold thousands and thousands of copies out there. But I personally wouldn't be happy with the book. Like if it were my book, like I'd be like, who you love numbers, you love like you want bands, you want people to enjoy your work and things like that. But I think I'm just the kind of person that's like, no, I feel like I can push this more.
Okay, this brings me to a line from Jay-Z said it actually. He said, would you rather be underpaid or overrated? And then the next line is like, moral victories are for minor league coaches. And I think about that because it's like, you're right. Because it's like this thought that, again, because you never know, let's say I say something randomly and then it catches on and then it's viral. And then I'm like, okay, would I be smart to be like, there's 2 lines that I said that's like, it's not super deep or, you know, intrinsic or special. There's nothing great about this thing, but it's like, let's say it has 10 million impressions and people are following me and retweeting it and like whatever. Like, would I be smart to keep going on the trajectory of that brand? I figured out there's people behind it. I figured out there's an audience that is willing to listen and track with that. And maybe if I dig deeper into that exact line, then it's like I might be able to get what I can get out of that audience and maybe grow from that. Or would I be like, man, hey everybody, appreciate all y'all laughing and, you know, rocking with this thing that I said, but that was actually the stupidest thing that I could have ever said. And like, what are you guys thinking? Right. So it's like, I think that I would absolutely, I could see how that same mechanism might happen with somebody who's like, maybe they've never spoken in front of a crowd before a day in their life. And because they've never spoken in front of like a large crowd before a day in their life, it's like you go in front of the crowd, you say this thing that you spent whatever amount of time writing and then practicing. And because of the function of the space, again, the space is somebody goes up, they say poems, and then you are done with your poem, and then people clap. And then maybe afterwards people support you. They're like, hey, I really like that poem. God forbid somebody says like rewind, and they're like, and now you're like, oh my God, I got him. Like that's like for a lot of poems, for a lot of performers, like that's like an incredibly exhilarating experience. And it's like all those components, all those things put together, maybe that gives you the same feeling than that a lot of people might get with this thing just went viral. So now it's like, okay, now maybe somebody that maybe sees your work, maybe sees some value in what it could become. Maybe they want to take a shot and say like, well, hey, like I've been doing this for a while. I actually think that you got something good here, but you know, your poems could be better. Like let's rap. Let's, you know, so because like how receptive you might be, incredibly receptive to that if you walked off and nobody clapped and nobody said rewind and nobody said like, now you're like, dang, maybe I'm really open to that. But maybe if the only thing that you were looking for is people clapping afterwards and you're like, man, they must really love me. But I'm like, that's just, again, and that's like a function of the place. And I don't think that people should stop clapping like at the end of the poems, as much as I think that like, I think that there isn't as many spaces for people to really get like honest opinion.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, because I don't think even if I didn't like somebody's piece, I don't think I would be like, hey, let's talk about, unless I knew them and I was close with them or whatever like that. Like like me and you've done that. Me and like Jordan, like there's been several people that like after shows, like, you know, kind of the things that we do is we talk about our work and we talk about like kind of the new stuff we tried or something new that we did performance wise. But for the most part, that's not what the space is for a lot of people. And a lot of people would actually be really, really shocked if they got that. You know what I mean? There's a lot of people that's like, oh, what? You don't like my work? Like, that means you're an enemy of mine now. So, yeah.
People have a hard time separating the work from themselves.
Yeah.
But I think, what was the quote again you said?
Would you rather be underpaid or overrated? Moral victories are for minor league coaches. And yeah, I was about to wrap the whole thing, but that's
because I think, you know, it all depends on what are you seeking. I think for validation. So, like for instance, in that quote, like it's kind of an interesting quote because you have two kind of things. You have overpaid versus underrated. Like, I mean, those in a lot of ways that's you have different validation points. One is based on money. It's like you're seeking validation through how much people are paying you, versus one is talking about reputation. I guess I don't.
Well, so here's the thing.
That's an interesting quote. Like it. Go on, yeah.
No, I was gonna say. So one of the things I was thinking about, and this is separate from that, but Kanye, this he was in this interview and he was kind of talking about underground that he said, like, underground rapper is kind of like the hipster excuse failure. And I don't necessarily agree with that entirely as much as I would. I don't agree with that entirely, but it's like it has all of the symptoms of truth because it's not like you are. It's like somebody that is rapping is like very don't want a large bandwidth. Like I very don't want a huge amount of people to know about me or to purchase the product that I create or to even get my music or anything like that. So I think I understand kind of the thought. Now there's a lot of like okay, like maybe sometimes the thing you do become like a really large artist or a famous artist or like things that you wouldn't want to compromise, and so like maybe there's something there, but yeah, I think when we're talking about the Jay-Z quote, the thing that I from that is like there's people Michael, not great, you're not good, like you're bad, or like feel you're a bad rapper or whatever like that. But it's, if everybody hates me, if all these people are like you're bad, you're terrible, you're terrible, but it's like I also happen to have a big base. I also happen to have other people that like if I put out a song, if I put a song onto right now, it's 100,000 end of the day, and it's gonna keep happening over and over again forever. It's gonna keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Like the conversation that we're having, what the goal is, because like maybe
exactly.
Maybe it's like if I'm able to build my corny brain of not good poems up to that are like not good poems by your day, I might be to like $1 million, $10 million, evaluation, and then I'm like, I can always write my serious books, later, or I could always like write my serious books now, and then just like keep my brand over here and like create a pseudonym and be like, I'm gonna release my serious stuff. You know what I mean? You could always do that, but it's like, especially in capitalism, it's like, okay, like it's like really impactful to be able to get to a point where like creating is your life's work. Like that's what you do to eat. And like, not only is it what you do to eat, it's like you do it really well. Like you're really affluent and you're able to continuously do this at a really high level. And I'm like, it's like, would you rather be overpaid? So like, you can be me, who's like, I'm not good, but like people pay me all this money and I can book this gig and this gig and this gig and do all this other stuff with material that you're like, that's not good material. That's not the artistic, the je ne sais quoi that we need, like, right? Or you can be you who's creating this really incredible, impactful work, but it's like flying really, really under the radar, and maybe you're not getting the kind of attention or what have you that you would really want. So I'm like, which one of us would you prefer to be? And I think if people looked at it honestly, if people looked at it as honestly as they could, I think a lot more people would absolutely be the rich person or the person that's making a lot creating. I don't even know. I think I might be that person if you have the opportunity to still create what the things that I want to create, and also you actually create a larger opportunity for you to create the things that you want to create, because it's like now it's like you have the space and opportunity and time to do that because you created platforms or whatever for yourself. So
I was listening to a business discussion talking about, like, let's say that you have a new product, a food product. We could bring up Costco for this. Just make you happy. So like,
the home of product food. Welcome to Costco.
Let's say like you're trying to, so you have a product, you feel really comfortable with your food product, you're new, you're trying to get out into the world, but you also want it to be around your brand. You're
right.
Like, I want to grow my brand. I like my product, but I also like what we stand for as a product. as a company. And then Costco comes to you and says, hey, love your stuff. We want to white label it. You'll immediately get 1000x where you are right now. Won't be your brand because it's white labeled, right? So it's going to be Clean. What do? You know? And I think I understand both sides, but I would definitely be the company that's like, I appreciate it, but I want to grow my brand, and this isn't going to grow my brand. But I see the other point, because there's going to be people that are like, no, you take the white label, because all that money you're going to be bringing in, you can then use for other means, And I certainly, I get that view, but to me, that still feels like a compromise on my brand.
Yeah, and that's kind of the debate too, right? Because it's like it's a compromise. It's for sure is like that, and that's the thing. It absolutely is. And for a lot of artists, that's the thing that's happening. Now, there's a lot of people that whatever you would maybe say is like corny or you don't like, that's their exact bandwidth. Like that's where they're at. That's where they're operating. And they're good at it. And that's the reason why they're able to make it really big. And so even when you're like, well, why don't you create something more like better and more sophisticated? Like when you're saying that, like, that means nothing to me, because like this is what I create. These are the things that I make. And so it's like kind of like you're straddling this line of, okay, like there's gonna be people that it's gonna feel like a compromise to them to be like, man, I don't want to do that. I don't want to, because I'm kind of selling myself short, or I'm selling myself out.
Stand for,
and I definitely can. So I would say, like, if it's compromising. So the thing is, if it's compromising my morals, that's something different than compromising my standard of art.
So, like, for instance, I mean, you put a book out. People are assuming you're creating your brand. That's your brand, right? That's your Are you saying? Okay, so just to make sure, so like you'd be okay. So, for instance, you make a book that you could do better on, but you also know this is going to sell this is going to get in way more hands, in front of way more eyeballs.
As long as it's not compromising like maybe morals that I have. So I think a lot about stuff like this. I like, I'm thinking like, I don't know, but at some point in the future that is to come, like I'll have like a child or multiple children, right? And I'm thinking like I will be, as it stands right now, like maybe the career path that I'm on right now that primarily feeds and keeps, like for my family, like maybe like the industry that I'm in right now is like, that's not a passion. That's not something that I want to be doing for the rest of my life. And so if I saw a window and an opportunity and I was like, wait a minute, if I do this thing, and and the thing is, it'd have to be like almost like a sure thing. It's like, I know for certain that I might think this is kind of goofy or whatever, but it's like, it's not compromising my morals. It's not compromising like morals that I have as a person, and maybe like in faith or anything like that. But it's like, is this thing that I know if I push this button and I push it for the next 5 years, I can make $10 million. It's like, it's a no-brainer. But it's also like, it's a no-brainer because it's like, again, especially if we're not talking about me having to, like, I don't have to stop creating. I don't have to stop being the person that I am. It's a new thing that I'm also doing that I'm like, this is something. Because it's like, I don't know. I don't necessarily look at myself as a brand. Maybe that's a problem, but that's just not something that I think about. I think about like, I'm a person that does things, and some of the stuff that I do is like poetry stuff. Some of the stuff I do is like hosting or comedy or photography, videography, like versions of storytelling. So it's like, I do an amalgamation of things, and maybe I'm not focused enough to be like, okay, I'm trying to create this story about myself across the platforms and space and time, that if you see something that is this goofy thing, it'll be out of character, and you'll be like, oh man, you're destroying your thing. Because I'm like, again, if that was the case, then it's like, okay, if you're telling me that I can put my family and myself in a comfortable enough position to, I know we kind of strayed away from open mics, but but I can put myself in a comfortable enough position to really not be working and not be, not do the thing that I do right now as a 9 to 5 that I just do because it feeds the family. It feeds me. It keeps us leaving. We're able to go on some vacations every now and again and all that good stuff. It's like, so like, yeah, in like that respect, I think about like, yeah, like if you're saying that you can just push this button right now and you are living a really good, comfortable life in the next 5 years, and then like maybe I can put it almost on like autopilot, in some capacity. It's like, it's kind of a no-brainer, because it's also like, and it's also, if like I would have to also know that the things that I'm doing now won't get me there maybe even soon, if at all, because it's like none of the stuff is guaranteed. There's plenty of people, there's plenty of artists that were incredible that died poor. There's plenty of artists that died, and then afterwards are recognized for their brilliance by us now, but in their time they weren't. And I just think like, man, like would I rather my kids be like, man, like, this guy was really, really working diligently to create something that like we could live off of, and all these other things, which I think that a lot of people that you kind of look at from now, the poetry stuff is like as creative something, and even if I'm not really super behind it, which probably the people that are close to me would know, and to me, like, who probably wouldn't even matter. Like, oh yeah, like, you're telling me that I could do it for this X years, and I'm gonna come in, and only thing that I'm about in that regard is like that stops me ever for my night. Well, of course, the amount of energy and creative space that I would have if I didn't have 9 to 5 that happened, and these everybody.
Sorry.
ChatGPT heard us talking about it. And what in the new what was it? Because it wasn't Sky anymore. It's Genesis or something.
Oh really? You tell me. I haven't seen the newest ones.
You haven't seen the newest ones?
I'm a horrible person.
Or maybe you have, but then just later on in time.
I'm sure future me might have seen it.
She's like, a portal opens up behind us, like, you have, and stop yourself.
All right, I might end this here.
Is there?
It's been a long time. I know we had a Poetry in the Wild, but it's late.
We did have a Poetry in the Wild. We'll talk about the Poetry in the Wild.
Yeah.
Next week. Let's do like 3 Poetry in the Wilds next week.
We can just do Poetry in the Wilds.
We can just do a whole bunch of Poetry in the Wild. I feel like people were like, oh, I like it. And then we just like, no thanks.
We can totally do that. Cool. Guys, thank you for joining us. Let us know your thoughts on we talked about open mics an hour ago.
Yeah, a really long time ago. Yeah, let us know what you think about open mics. Like, let us know, like, open mics in your area. Like, do you go to open mics in your area? And what are they? And what do you like about them? And then also, like, you know, tell us about your latest Costco trip. I want to know what you bought.
All right. Thank you, guys. I'm Jeff.
I'm Matthias.
You guys take it easy. This has been Versus Live.
Versus Live.